Today we're going to learn a little bit about perspective from a Chinese farmer and his horse. So there's this ancient Chinese proverb that's really awesome, and it goes a little something like this. So there's this Chinese farmer and he has a workhorse. One morning he wakes up to find out that his workhorse had run away in the night. So his neighbor comes over and says to him, "Oh no, this is terrible news. You've lost your horse." And the Chinese farmer, who is very wise, says something along the lines of, "Good news, bad news, who's to say?" A few days later, the horse comes back and it brings with it another horse. This same neighbor comes over and says to the farmer, "What great news! Now you have another horse." And the farmer says, "Good news, bad news, who's to say?" Well, he gives that horse to his son. And his son is riding on the horse sometime later and falls off his horse and breaks his leg. The neighbor comes over and says, "Oh, what terrible news. This is awful. What are you going to do? How are you going to work the farm without your son?" And the farmer, who is, again, very wise, says, "Good news, bad news, who's to say?" Not long after that, there's a big announcement that the country has gone to war and they need all of the able-bodied young men to come and fight in this war. And because the son has a broken leg, he stays home and he remains safe. So I'm not trying to say that we should just be neutral and robotic about everything in our life, but I do think that we can learn something about perspective here. Because the thing is, when we are in the midst of our lives, we do not have the full story. We really like to think that we know in any given moment if something is good or bad, and we like to pronounce this as if it is truth on these situations, but we really don't know. We don't see the full story. We don't have the full perspective of what's going on and what will happen in the future as a result of these things. What we can learn from these stories is that if we are willing to consciously step back from a situation and expand our view, then we're much less likely to pronounce definitively if something is good or bad for us. We realize there's so much more to the story. But see, our toddler brain, the part of our brain that's like on autopilot, really doesn't like to do this. It just wants to decide and move on. But the funny thing about our toddler brain is it's very wishy-washy. It will go back and forth, and it tends to be a bit dramatic. For example, many years ago, my husband and I bought a house in Cleveland, Ohio, when he was going to dental school there. And at the time, we thought this was going to be great. But the housing market crashed while we were there. And when we were leaving Ohio, we couldn't sell this house. This seemed like a huge problem to my toddler brain. In the 12 years since we left Cleveland, this house has really felt like a roller coaster for me. Unlike the Chinese farmer, there were many times that my brain pronounced something as definitely good or bad. Buying the house, good. Can't sell the house, bad. Getting renters, good. Renters not paying on time, bad. But most of the things I was sure were bad. Repairs, managing renters, empty house, different renters, house on the market, no offers, more repairs, more renters, another time with no offers, renters not paying, more repairs, and so on. Notice how my brain is so back and forth and so dramatic about how this is terrible. And I even have this thought like this is the worst financial decision of our lives. And maybe it is, but the thing is, I don't have the full story. So looking back, I can already see some of the benefits of having had this house. The trust that we had to put in our Heavenly Father, that things would work out, and they always did. And the things that we learned about finances and the decision making that we've made since then that has benefited from this past decision. The people who were able to live in the house who may have benefited from having housing. There are so many things that I can look back on and start to just get a little tiny glimpse of the benefits of the situation, and I still don't have the full story. I don't know exactly what's going to happen next or how we're going to benefit in the future still from having had this experience. But the cool thing is I know someone that does have that full view, and that's my Heavenly Father, and I can trust in Him in this process. Now, that doesn't mean that we need to decide that everything's either neutral or great. It's okay if we decide that something is bad news. There's nothing wrong with that. We knew that we were going to come down to this earth and experience things that felt like bad news. Broadening your perspective doesn't necessarily make the thing that you're experiencing any easier in that moment, but it can remove some of the bitterness and it can bring hope. So when you're in that place where things feel dark and like there's bad news all around you, just remember that you're looking at one chapter, maybe even only one page in one chapter of the massive story of your life. And your story isn't over yet. You don't see the end, but you have heavenly parents that do, and they love you and they stand by your side. They adore you. They set this up for you because of who you would be on the other side of this experience. And knowing that they have promised you that all of these things will work together for your experience and for your good, even if it doesn't happen in this chapter. Let's broaden our perspective. Your story doesn't end here. You've totally got this. Today,